The number one biggest impact on your ability to get high parses is keeping your world buffs intact throughout the entire raid. So first, let's talk about how the world buffs work. When do they get knocked off? So let's say that you get your Nexia buff and Songflower buff, and then let's say you get your Trib and then some other buffs. And then that will put you probably around anywhere from 20 to 25 buffs. And that's not the point where you get knocked off after you get your consumables and your world buffs. It's during the fight when you get things like if your raid is still doing some hots are placed on you. Things like if you're a warrior, you're getting flurry or enrage. So what happens is as they pile up, eventually you get to your 30-second buff. And at that point, once the 30-second buff hits, then you're full. Then your 33rd buff, so let's say this is our 33rd buff, hits, then the first one that was applied or has been on the longest gets knocked off. And then the whole thing starts over again. 32, then when it happens again, you get your 33rd, your next one's knocked off. So the question is, how can you better manage your world buffs and track them and be able to keep the 32 on at all times that you really need, that have the biggest impact? The first step is you want to make a raid plan, a buff raid plan, so you know which buffs you're going to be targeting throughout the raid. So there's a link in the description. This is a link I got for a buff calculator I got from the Fight Club Discord. And what you need to do is go through and check all the world buffs and the consumables that you want to take into your raid. So you go through, check. If you want the fire resistance buff from Ubers, you click that. You go through, so like on Darkling Fair Week, you hit there. Anyway, and it starts to keep track. You'll get all the way up to 32. Once you have that first part of your plan made with everything checked off, you'll want to keep this open as you go to the next phase. You also can hit share and you can copy the link and paste it someplace where you can keep. Then next we'll be using an add-on called Buff Cap Tracker, and I'll show you how to use that. Okay, I'm here on my farming alt, who's a hunter, while my main is parked with some buffs as I go through my world buff rotation. Now, this add-on Buff Cap Tracker, it's got this overlay that's just a simple one, and it just simply shows you how many buffs you have out of the 32 and the next one that's going to fall off. So right now, I got Arcane Intellect, that's going to fall off next, hypothetically if I were to fill up. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to jump right into the add-on section, and we are going to set this up, and I'll show you a few basic things. Even though I'm on my alt, I still can work on my profile for my warrior. So I got that profile selected. And then I'm going to show a couple of features here. There's passive blacklisting and active blacklisting. Passive just simply means you can have certain buffs or certain auras removed immediately as soon as they're placed on you. And so if you're a warrior, stuff like Arcane Intellect, if you're in a raid and you don't need things like Thorns because that's something you've deemed that you don't need, then you can set it up there. The Spirit buff from Priest and so on. And then you have active. You have active blacklisting. Now what that means is in combat you can have a list of auras that you want to remove, and you can use this command right here to put to a macro, and you then macro that to an ability that you spam a lot. So like for me, I'd be using it on Heroic Strike or Bloodthirst, or something that I'm mashing throughout the fight, and it's going to be consistently removing auras that you blacklist. Now, how do you blacklist? Go here to auras, and we just search them and we put them in a certain designation. So let's search for Arcane Intellect and Arcane Brilliance. Arcane Brilliance, that's something we don't need, blacklist. Arcane Intellect, blacklist. And I go through and I use everything off of my Buff Cap Tracker, I'll bring this over, that I have chosen, and I just go off that as a guide, and I blacklist everything I don't need. Then when that's done, then I create a fresh macro for active, and I just macro that to my ability. And then I can enable this for passive. And so this hopefully will give you a good idea of how you can keep your world buffs in control, and you can avoid things like dropping your Nixia head buff or dropping Songflower, and removing things you don't need, like Thorns or Hots, Arcane Brilliance, all those things that we talked about.